You ever find yourself in an argument where it feels like you're talking to someone from a completely different reality? Where even basic, verifiable facts are suddenly up for debate? Well, today we're going to dig into why that's happening. We're looking at a pretty powerful analysis of how these attacks on so-called experts can end up creating the perfect environment for some really discriminatory ideas to take hold.
So here's our plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at why it feels like we can't agree on facts anymore. Then we're going to define the specific communication tool that's being used. After that, we'll see how that tool gets linked to discrimination, check out some real-world examples, and finally, and this is the important part, we'll explore what we can actually do about it.
All right, Section 1, the crumbling ground of facts. This gets right to the heart of that frustrating feeling I was just talking about, that sense that the very foundation of public debate is just cracking.
I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It's not just about disagreeing on opinions anymore. We're at a point where we often can't even agree on the basic data we should be using to form those opinions. So why? What's going on?
And here it is. This is the core argument of the whole analysis. This isn't happening by accident. The idea here is that our shared ground for what's true isn't just eroding on its own, it is being actively and intentionally demolished. That idea really sets the stage for everything else we're about to cover.
So if it's intentional, how is it done? That brings us right to Section 2, the rhetoric of mistrust. We've identified the problem, so now let's define the specific mechanism that's being used. It's about naming the actual tool in the toolbox.
And the key term is anti-expert rhetoric. Now, what's so important in this definition is that word wholesale. See, this isn't about finding a legitimate flaw in one study or criticizing a single article. It's a blanket attack. The goal is to discredit entire fields of knowledge, science, journalism, the whole shebang, as just a general tactic.
And I bet you've heard these phrases before, right? They're basically the calling cards of this type of rhetoric. When you hear so-called experts, or that something is a hoax or a con job, that's a huge red flag. These phrases aren't meant to start a debate. They're designed to shut one down before it can even begin.
And this comparison just lays it out perfectly. Look, legitimate criticism is absolutely essential. It picks apart evidence to get us closer to the truth. But anti-expert rhetoric? It does the exact opposite. It skips over the hard work of examination and just injects a simple, powerful emotion, distrust. It's all about creating an us, the people who are in on the secret, versus them, the corrupt experts who are trying to fool us. Okay, on to Section 3, how discrimination profits. This is where we connect the dots. We're about to see how that manufactured distrust we just talked about becomes the fertile soil for something much, much more dangerous to grow.
And here's why this all matters so much. Most discriminatory arguments are actually incredibly fragile. They completely fall apart as soon as you hold them up against real data and history and context. So for those arguments to even survive, they need an environment where data and context are seen as irrelevant.
And here are some textbook examples. You've got misleading stories about crime that just cherry-pick statistics, or metaphors that frame immigration as an invasion. Or what about assigning guilt to an entire group for what a few individuals did? All of these tactics require you to ignore the bigger picture, the very picture that experts and journalists are supposed to provide.
So how do you create that environment? Well, according to this analysis, it's a two-step process. Step 1. You have to relentlessly attack the very institutions that provide all that context and data. You've got to convince people that the referees of fact, journalists, scientists, researchers aren't neutral. No, they're the enemy.
And while it doesn't get much more direct than this, does it? This phrase, as documented by news agencies, has been used over and over again to frame journalists not as people doing a job, but as actual adversaries of the public. This is step 1, right in front of us.
And the result of this is, honestly, it's devastatingly effective. Because once you've discredited the source of the facts themselves become worthless. A fact check from a news outlet isn't seen as a helpful correction anymore. It's just dismissed as more propaganda from the enemy. The entire system we have for correcting falsehoods just gets completely short-circuited.
Which brings us to Section 4, the mechanism in practice. So now we're going to look at a few examples. And the goal here isn't to draw any false equivalencies, but to analyze how this same rhetorical pattern pops up in different times in different contexts.
What's so interesting here is seeing the mechanism broken down. For institutional devaluation, think about when a country pulls out of an international scientific body. That sends a powerful signal that their expertise just doesn't matter anymore. For con job framing, you see it used against climate science to create that generalized distrust. And historically, the source points to propaganda's ultimate goal, to monopolize truth by systematically tearing down any other authority, whether it's the press or the courts.
And I really have to pause here and stress this point because it's so important. The source material is crystal clear about this, and so are we. This is not about comparing people or different points in history. It is a structural analysis of a communication tactic, a mechanism, and how that mechanism works to clear the way for certain kinds of ideas.
Okay, so after all of that heavy analysis, let's pivot to solutions. Section 5, what we can do. Because this isn't just some problem we have to sit back and watch. There are actual evidence-based strategies we can use to push back. Here are 3 really powerful ones. First up, pre-bunking. Think of it like a vaccine for misinformation. You expose people to a weakened form of the tactic ahead of time, so they build up an immunity and can recognize it when they see the real thing. Second, setting norms. This is about calmly naming what's going on. Instead of getting into a big fight, you can just say, that's a tactic called delegitimization. Here's a source that explains it. And third, institutional transparency. Trust has to be earned. Institutions like science and the media have to be open about how they work and, crucially, about when they make mistakes.
And this quote from the source material really just ties it all together perfectly. The ultimate danger here isn't just getting the facts wrong. It's about destroying our correction systems, the very things that are supposed to protect us from unchecked dehumanization.
So, we'll just leave you with this final question to think about. When the very idea of a verifiable fact is successfully torn down, and the people and institutions responsible for checking those facts are painted as the enemy, who really wins?